I hope everybody can appreciate that I made a special effort to look extra woodsy today because the leaves, folklore, okay. Hi everybody, hope you're doing well. My name is Saajid. Welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been living under a rock for the past couple of months, you would know that Taylor Swift surprise dropped not one, but two albums. Folklore back in July, and most recently, just a couple days ago, she dropped Evermore, which is a sister album to Folklore, meaning that they both kind of have similar aesthetics and music and all that kind of stuff. I really love both of these albums, and I was surprised because when Folklore first came out, I kind of ignored it because I was like, oh, it's acoustic slow music, that's not my jam. Like, I really love 1989 Reputation, Lover Taylor, you know, the upbeat kind of pop music, that's my vibe. I like the previous albums before that. I love Red and the little country albums, like they were all cute, but I love me some pop Taylor. So when Folklore came out, I was like, I ain't gonna listen to that. Then I did, and I was like, wow, that was brilliant. And then when she announced Evermore, I was like, this bitch.
Her talent and brilliance is beyond. She surprises me all the time.
They're just really great bodies of work, and today I wanted to kind of pick some of my favorite songs from each album and match them up to a book for you. So hopefully if you like Folklore, you could get some recommendations for books that might be reminiscent of the same kind of emotions that you might have gotten when you listen to the album. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. I'm not going to do every song because that would be too much. I'm picking my top 5 favorite songs from Folklore and my top 5 from Evermore. Starting off with Folklore, my first favorite song on that album is The One, and I really like this song. I think it's just, it has such a sad, disappointing kind of like, I'm at peace now but I'm still disappointed kind of tone, and I really like that about the song. If I had to compare this to a book, it's not really so much the book that relates to the song, but how I felt about the book. This book could have been The One, and that was Mad, Bad and Dangerous to Know by Samira Ahmed. I enjoyed this book for what it was, but I felt like it had so much potential to be better. My main issue with it is the relationship in the book. I really hated the main character's love interest. I felt like he was such an awful person to her, and she only ended up having to forgive him several times throughout the book because she needed to use him to get the information that she needed for the research that she was doing. So it's about this Muslim girl who is spending her summer in Paris, and she's doing research on this mysterious painting and a woman from the painting. Turns out the woman was a real woman, a woman from Turkey like 200-300 years back in the past, and we're also getting a perspective from that woman, and that was the thing that I was looking forward to the most in the story, the perspective from that woman. But her perspective were only just like a couple pages between each of the main characters' chapters, and I just felt like there was such a missed opportunity to expand a little bit more on that historical narrative. Those were the parts of the book that I enjoyed the most, and we barely got to see any of it. When you get to the end, you kind of understand why it's written the way it's written, but I felt like I would have enjoyed if I had gotten that a little bit more. So if that was done better, and if the whole relationship dynamic was done better, this could have been like one of my favorite books of the year, but it really let me down, unfortunately. I had a lot of high expectations for it, and I was disappointed, suffice to say. Samira Ahmed is a great writer. I'll continue to read her books, but this one just was not my favorite of hers, unfortunately. My next favorite song off of Folklore is Karagan, which is the lead single of Folklore, and I don't think it's one of the strongest songs on the album, but it's definitely a song that I can't get out of my head. Just like the theme of the song, it always follows me around. It's a song that I always go back to, even though I try to convince myself that I don't care for it as much as the other songs. It's a really memorable song, and the music video is just absolutely gorgeous. And the book that I would choose for this song is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. Now, it's strange because I haven't reread it since I read it for the first time 4 years ago, but it's definitely the book that I always look back to and I always reference as my favorite book of all time. And I really haven't read anything where I feel like it could compete with the brilliance of this story, and I know that if I reread it, I'll love it just as much as I did the first time. I think that this is just such a phenomenal story that, you know, it's kind of underrated. Like, it's a little popular, people talk about it, but not that much people talk about it, and I feel like more people should talk about it because it's really good. If you like folklore vibes and that kind of stuff, you might really enjoy this book. It's essentially about this woman who finds a diary of a young girl who claims to be committing suicide, and the diary is kind of like her very long suicide letter. So you're reading reading the story of the woman who's reading the diary, but you're also reading the diary along with her. So it's like a double POV. And it's this really kind of like meta exploration of the relationship between a reader and a writer. And it's a good book for people who love stories and stories about storytelling and stories about the connection between readers and storytellers. It's a fantastic book, and it is truly a phenomenal read. If you haven't checked it out as yet, please read A Tale for the Time Being. The next song is probably my favorite song off of Folklore, and I think a lot of people's favorite song off of Folklore, and that is Last Great American Dynasty. It's just such a fun, catchy, upbeat song, and the story of the song is so interesting. I love the story of this kind of like crazy or mad, misunderstood woman that is kind of perceived as, ruining everything and spoiling everything, but nobody is really actually trying to look into this woman's history or her past or really trying to understand where she comes from. That really reminds me of Mala Ramchandran from Serious Blooms at Night. This is Caribbean fiction. It's set on a fictional island that is very much inspired by Trinidad. Our main protagonist is Mala. We're following her throughout her life at different stages in her life, and we're essentially following how her very traumatic and tumultuous past has come to shape her into being the woman that she is today. And she has very much turned into the village crazy lady. People look at her as this mad woman that you have to stay away from. Her house is old and rickety and rotting away. All of the plant and foliage is like growing and blocking the house, and people just see her as like this crazy unkept old woman, but nobody cares to look into her past and really try to figure out what the bigger picture is, why she is who she is today. And that's what the story in this book does. I love it for that. And when I listen to The Last Great American Dynasty, I think about this book, even though they're both very different stories in terms of like cultural context and whatnot. I think that the reluctance to understand a woman who has been traumatized and whose life and whose seemingly crazy life is a product of something bigger, the reluctance for people to understand that in that song is very much present here in this book, and it's heartbreaking. This is one of the best books that I've read this year. Mutu is an excellent writer, and I constantly talk about her work on my channel. This is the first of 2 books that I'll be mentioning in this tag. But yeah, if you haven't read Serious Blooms at Night, please do yourself the justice of reading it. It's great. I know I just said Last Great American Dynasty is my favorite song on Folklore, but the one that I go back to and listen to the most is definitely Invisible String. I just love this song. I think it's so cute, and I love the idea of this like invisible thread that like binds 2 people together. Like no matter where you are in the world, you'll find that person because the thread is tied. I just think it's so cute. It's such a Taylor thing. Like, oh my god, like of course she had to come up with that song. I love it. It's such an adorable song. And when I think about this song, I think about Adam and Zainab from Love From A to Z. This is a young adult novel about these 2 teens who kind of coincidentally meet by fate on a flight to Doha. One is from Canada, the other is from the States. And they meet on this flight, and they keep meeting back each other in the city of Doha when they're there. And it's almost like, fate ties them together, and that's kind of like the point of the whole story. It's not just a love story between these 2, but it's also about these 2 separate characters going through very different things. It's about Islamophobia, it's about illness, it's about grief and all sorts of different things. Like this book touches on a wide array of topics and the way that it could affect the lives of young people. Just a fantastically constructed story, but in the midst of the 2 of these characters kind of figuring themselves out, they always come back to each other, and that just really is reminiscent of Invisible String for me. So if you haven't read this book as yet, I feel like I'm a broken record at this point. If you haven't read Love From A to Z as yet, you really need to do that, because it's an adorable story. And if you want to read more romance books with like Muslim characters, I highly recommend that you try this one out. My brother and sister-in-law have some renovations going on in their kitchen, so if you could hear an annoying hammer in the background, I can't really do anything about that, sorry. The final song on Folklore that I have to talk about today is Betty. This is such an adorable song. I love how she's singing from the perspective of like a teenage boy. When I first listened to it, I thought Taylor was serving up some gay realness, and I was just 100% here for that. I was like, yes, I love lesbian Taylor. Lesbian Taylor is a vibe. But apparently that's not what she was doing. She was singing from the perspective of a boy, which is less exciting, but still cute. Anyways, the book that comes to my mind when I think about this song is Frankly in Love by David Yoon. This is about a boy named Frank Lee. Title is a pun. And essentially his parents are very strict Korean parents who only want him to date a Korean girl, but he's in love with this white girl. So he like concocts this scheme with another Korean American girl from his school named Joy to pretend that she's his girlfriend so that his parents wouldn't be suspicious of him dating the white girl. But of course, as these things go, he ends up falling for Joy, and now he's in this kind of like love triangle with the white girl whose name I can't remember. And I just had a hiccup. Did the ghost of like an angry white person try to choke me? Because honestly, I'm kind of into that. Anyways, what was I saying? So he's in this love triangle with the Korean girl, Joy, and the little white girl. And it's a whole complicated situation. And I guess it kind of reminds me of the boy, James, I think is his name, in Betty. Because he's kind of in love with two people. Or he had this thing with this one person, but he's really in love with the other. And that's essentially what Frankly in Love is about. And I really enjoyed this story for what it was. It's definitely not like my most favorite young adult novel ever, but this is definitely the first book that comes to my mind when I think, what was the name of the song again? Betty. Always forgetting these white girl names. So now we're moving on to Evermore. So the lead single off of Evermore is Willow. Willow music video is one of the most gorgeous music videos that I've seen in my entire life. It's like a continuation of Karagan, but it's so much better. It's pretty, it's glittery, it's mystical, it's magical, and the song has this whole magical vibe to it that I just absolutely love. So the book that comes to mind when I think about this song is actually a book that doesn't really have anything, like the story of the book has nothing to do with the story of the song whatsoever, but it's the vibe of the book. Like, it's a very it's a story that's very much rooted in reality with a little magical sort of mystical twist, and the writing in it is so gorgeous and almost poetic to the point where it very much has the same vibes as Willow for me. And that is A Silent Life by Rayan Shah. This is one of my favorite books of the year. It is a gorgeously written story set in Guyana about this woman named Aaliyah, whose grandmother has always been a point of fascination in her life, and her grandmother is a very silent woman who doesn't speak. So Aaliyah is trying to figure out why her grandmother is the way that she is, and she begins from a very young age to have these visions of her grandmother's past, and they come to her very randomly and, you know, unexpectedly, and she starts to piece together, you know, what happened in her grandmother's past to traumatize her and essentially turn her into the silent person that she is today. And she soon begins to realize too that what happened in her grandmother's past might be kind of repeating itself in her own life. And it's such a gorgeous story, just the way that it's written, the sort of fabulous element woven into the story makes it very magical and gives it this mystical vibe, even though there's no magic really. It's just such a good book, and I also really appreciated the exploration of like a Muslim Caribbean experience, which is not something that you see very often. It's a wonderful story, so if you haven't read it, please just drop everything else and read A Silent Life. It is excellent Caribbean fiction that everybody should read. My next favorite song off of Willow is another huge fan favorite, and that is Champagne Problems. Taylor, I have a bone to pick with you. You can't be making me feel this depressed. Like, I related to this song, not that I proposed to anybody or anything like that, but I definitely think I know what it's like to kind of have that unrequited feeling. I think a lot of us have experienced that before, and it's really hard, right? Because the person singing the song, Taylor, or whoever's perspective that she's singing from, you know, is not a bad person. She didn't do anything wrong. She just didn't feel the way about that person that the person wanted her to feel. And that's, I think, kind of like the hardest thing about like situations like this. You have these expectations that this person would you know, reciprocate your feelings, and they don't, and it's not their fault, and it's not your fault, and it's nobody's fault, and there's nobody to blame. It's just a really sucky situation. Okay, this is getting kind of personal for me right now. So that kind of feeling of not being wanted by the person you love is something we could all relate to, and it's a really terrible feeling. And that was invoked in me by this particular book that also is very different from the story. I wouldn't call the main character's problems in this book Champagne Problems, because he has some very valid problems. I mean, that's not to say that champagne problems are invalid, right? But like, I would say that they're a little bit more than champagne problems. They're more like, you know, acid problems. It's really terrible. Okay, so it's History Is All He Left Me by Adam Silvera, and as I said, like, you might be thinking, okay, how does this connect to champagne problems? problems. Well, that feeling of, not really being loved by the person that you love, or not getting a chance to love them in the way that you want to, is very much present in this book, because this is a really, really sad story about this boy whose ex-boyfriend passes away. And the thing is, he broke up with his ex-boyfriend not because they wanted to break up, but because they kind of had to, because they were moving to separate countries or states or whatever. And then the boyfriend went and found a new boyfriend and fell in love with somebody else, and then he died. It's like this really kind of sad story where the person who you love, the person who you want to spend your life with, I mean, even though they're like teenagers in this book because it's a young adult novel, you can't, because of the circumstances. In this case, he moved away, got a new boyfriend, and then died. It's a little bit more dramatic, I guess, than somebody telling you no when you propose to them. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that the feeling, the vibe that I get when I listen to Champagne Problems is the vibe that I got when I read History's All You Left Me. Such a heartbreaking book, just like this is such a heartbreaking song. Definitely recommend it if you haven't read it as yet. The next song off of Willow that I really like is one where I don't care if it's sonically, it's not like a song that I go back and listen to voluntarily, but I really appreciate it lyrically and thematically. I think it's just a brilliantly constructed song and story, and it's called Tolerated. This is also a song about unrequited love, or love that kind of falls off after a while. Essentially, Taylor is now singing from the perspective of the person who's not loved back, and she's in a relationship with this person, and they've been together for long, as it seems, and the person doesn't really love her anymore. He just kind of tolerates her love and her efforts for the sake of being with her. And it's a really hard song to listen to, because it invokes that kind of feeling of rejection again. But like, for me, it's more a song about people who already are in a committed relationship, but one of them kind of fell out of love with the other, which is just a terrible, terrible feeling. And the book that comes to mind for that is another Shani Mutu book, and that is Polar Vortex. And this is a story about a couple who are kind of going through the same thing. Priya, who's originally from Trinidad, is living in Canada with her partner Alex, and they've been together for quite a long time. And they both kind of drift apart due to circumstances that are happening in the book. And Priya is very much trying for it not to fall apart, because she really, really wants to maintain this relationship with Alex, because she loves Alex, but she doesn't really feel like Alex feels the same. And it's a really heartbreaking story, because you kind of get to see their relationship crumble throughout the course of it, and you see that Priya doesn't want it to fall apart, but there's a difference between wanting a relationship to work out and wanting things to go the way you want it to go, versus where it's actually realistically heading in terms of what the two people are actually feeling. You might want to be with this person for the rest of your life in terms of all of the external things that come with it, right? You want to be in a committed relationship, you want to be in love, but is that really what you're in? And that's kind of the vibe that I get from Tolerated, and it's definitely the vibe that you'll get from Polar Vortex. Fantastically written novel as well. So I mean, as I said, just read Shani Mutu's work, it's incredible. Now on to like my favorite frickin' song off of Evermore, and that is Nobody No Crime featuring Haim. I've never really listened to much Haim, but this song, this song is so freaking good. Taylor was like, let me take y'all back to the country. Let me take y'all bitches back to the fucking country. She was like, let me put back on my little, curly hair and my little cowboy boots and my little guitar, and we go and sing on the porch and the night bugs flying around and all kind of shit. She was like, let's go back to the country. Okay, there was even a truck reference in the song, because it ain't a country song if they don't say something about a fucking truck. It's such a good song. I love it. And the book that definitely comes to mind for this one is The Beast of Cucuyo by Kevin Jared Hussein. This is set in Trinidad in a small village, and it's about this girl named Rune who is very upset by the murder of one of her classmates, whose body was found in the village, and she's very much determined to find out who did it, because the police kind of like wrote off the crime. They couldn't figure out who did it. So she's very much trying to figure out what's going on and kind of decoding the mystery of what happened, and she ends up getting herself into a lot of trouble and has to cover her tracks. So like, what she's going through sounds very much like, you know, the people who's singing the song, you know, whether it's Taylor or the character that she created or whatever. Except that person is definitely a lot more calculated and knows what they're doing. Ruth is like a hot mess. She's just like, I'm trying to figure shit out, but it's not working out because it's really difficult for her to kind of work her way around the village without people kind of suspecting what she's up to. Such a good book. It has a very horror-esque vibe to it, just the way that it's written. So I highly recommend that you read this young adult novel. It's brilliant, super underrated because it's like a regionally published book. People in the States don't talk about this novel as much, but it is such a wonderful story. I recommend it all the time. So definitely give this a try if you love mystery, if you want to read more books set in the region. It is such a fantastic read. Final song off of Evermore that I love is Marjorie. It hits home for me in so many different ways. I lost my grandmother 2 years ago, and I also feel like this very deep spiritual connection with my other grandmother. So I actually had 3 grandmothers. The one who I lost 2 years ago was actually technically my great aunt, but I refer to her as my grandmother because that's what she was to me. Her sister was my maternal grandmother, and even though I never knew my maternal grandmother, she died when I was a baby, I very much feel a connection with her. It's so weird. And so I related to that aspect of the song, and I also related to the sadness of losing your grandmother because I experienced that with my other grandmother 2 years ago when she passed. So this song really spoke to me, and not only did I relate to the lyrics of the song, it's just such a gorgeous song. The way that she sings it, the melodies, the music, it's sad and it's beautiful and it's nostalgic. And I love that the lyric video was a tribute to her grandmother. Just a really beautifully done piece. It's fantastic. The book that comes to mind when I think of this is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X. Pan, which is sort of a fabulous novel about this girl who loses her mother to suicide. And after her mother dies, she begins to see this red bird appear to her. And she starts to realize that this bird is actually somewhat of a reincarnation of her mother, and it's trying to get her to go back to Taiwan, where her mother was originally from, so that she could kind of learn a little bit more about her family history, which is something that her mother was always reluctant to tell her about. You know, her mother passed away, but she didn't really, you know, cease to exist. She comes back to the main character. She speaks to her and she reconnects with her, but in a way that's different. And I feel like that's kind of what Marjorie is trying to talk about, the song Marjorie. The connection that you feel with somebody after they pass away. When somebody dies, they don't just go away, they remain a part of you, whether you want to see that as like a spiritual connection, whether you see it as a psychological thing, you know, they never really leave, and there's a comfort in knowing or in believing that they're still there and they're still watching you and they're still guiding you. So definitely get that vibe from this book, and I get that vibe from this song. If you haven't read it, you know what to do. Go read it. Okay, things are getting really intense with this kitchen renovation. They're starting to drill now. So I'm done. This is it for this video. In the comments down below, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, if you have any thoughts on them. Do you have any recommendations for books that might have reminded you of either of these albums? And did you like the albums? Which one do you like more? Folklore or Evermore? What are some of your favorite songs? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you all ever so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely, lovely day. And until next time, inshallah, keep reading.